Hello, and welcome to Exploring Career Opportunities at the Department of State webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to the National Society of High School Scholars for their continued partnership. My name is Chris Schwab, and I work at the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs in Washington, D.C. We like acronyms at the State Department quite a bit, and so Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs is often referred to as ECA. I work in the part of the office for Alumni Affairs, and Alumni Affairs, like any other alumni program, follows up with participants after they've participated in our exchange activities. The Department of State has a number of exchange programs and study abroad opportunities. For Americans and foreign participants, there are about 300,000 people around the world every year that go on exchanges. This includes thousands and thousands of Americans that go on high school exchanges. We send American high school students all around the world for either a summer or an academic year. And you can find more about these programs at exchanges.state.gov/high school. But there's other ways to get involved in exchanges. Some of the activities we do here at the State Department, if you are not looking to travel, you and your families can also consider hosting an international high school exchange student. We bring in to the United States thousands of foreign high school students every year to live with an American family, go to the local high school, and really experience what it's like to be an American teenager for a year. If that sounds interesting to you, you can go to hosting.state.gov and learn more about those opportunities. You may be familiar with the State Department. It is the lead U.S. government foreign affairs agency and the oldest U.S. cabinet department in the U.S. government. It is led by a Secretary of State who is the president's lead foreign affairs advisor. And the Department of State represents the United States and advances American interests and protects U.S. citizens at more than 270 embassies, consulates, and diplomatic missions worldwide. Embassies are usually located in the capital of a foreign country, and consulates are then located in other main cities around the country. Domestically, the department consists of bureaus and offices. Some bureaus handle regional issues, such as the Bureau of African Affairs, and some focus on functional topics, such as ECA, which we focus on educational exchanges, or things like the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. The workforce at the department consists of several different employment types. There are about 80,000 employees worldwide that are direct employees. This includes foreign service officers, civil service employees such as myself, and what we call locally employed staff. These are employees that are nationals of a host country where an embassy is and work within the embassy community. Regardless of whether an employee serves in the foreign or civil service or where they are located, all of those are working for the U.S. Department of State to contribute to U.S. interests and implementing foreign policy. Our panelists and I are looking forward to telling you more about the great opportunities for a fulfilling career that the department offers. Joining me today are Dan Patarini and Brianna Olson, both of whom are foreign service officers. We will each tell you a bit about our career paths that led us to the State Department, and then we'll have a lot of time for questions. And I will start about my career for the next couple minutes. Again, as I mentioned, my name is Chris Schwab. I am a civil service employee at the Department of State. I've been here for about 16 years. And I came to the department probably in a way that we see a lot of people come to the department, but there's a lot of different paths if you're interested in foreign affairs. I grew up in California, went to college in California, and as I was debating what I wanted to do with my career and my life, I tried out many different majors in college. I was going to be a physical therapist. Then I was curious about becoming an engineer. And then I took a couple classes on international affairs. My family hosted some German exchange students for a few weeks at our home. And that really piqued my interest more in international affairs. And I started taking more classes on that in college. And I ended up with an internship at the State Department my senior year of college. Back then, most of the internships were in person. We didn't have quite as many virtual opportunities as we do today. And I spent a semester working actually in the bureau I work in now, Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, working on an exchange program, hosting visitors from all over the world, learning about their issues and what they wanted to learn about. And it really got me hooked on this type of work. I hadn't known much about it before my internship. I saw the impact it was making in people's lives every day, making these connections with foreign citizens and Americans, sharing their expertise with each other, sharing their culture, their life stories, things like that, and how they stayed in touch and continued to work together. So I got really hooked on that and decided, much to the surprise of my parents back in California, that I was not going back to California, and I decided to stay in the Washington, D.C. area. I got a job at an NGO, a non-governmental or nonprofit organization. There's a lot of those in the Washington, D.C. area, and a lot of them work really closely with the U.S. government on a variety of projects. And so I found one that was working on one of the professional exchanges that I've been involved in during my internship. And I spent about 5 or 6 years there, doing all different things, starting off entry level, a variety of administrative work, but getting involved in more interesting projects as I worked my way up in that organization. But after about 5 or 6 years, I wanted something different. I had never thought I would work for the US government. It was not something that was ever on my radar, but a lot of the people we were working with at the US government, at the State Department, were telling me about all the benefits and opportunities. So I decided to apply. I was selected and have been here for about 16 years now. And the main reason I decided to make the switch from the NGO world to the government is I wanted to be in one organization, one employment system for most of my career, but in a place that had a lot of opportunities. And so for me, the State Department offered that. The NGO I was at was very small. It did great work. I really enjoyed the work. But if I was there, I'd still be doing the same thing today that I was 16, 17 years ago. And as a civil servant, you get hired for a specific job. You have an expertise in a certain topic or a field, and you get hired to do that job. And you will be in that job until you choose to apply for a different job within the government or get a transfer to a different position. Some civil servants stay in those positions 10 years, 20 years. They love the position they got hired for. They have an expertise in it. But I wanted more variety. So I've moved jobs about every 3 or 4 years in the civil service. I first worked on a professional exchange program where we brought in young adults from all over the world. It was called the International Visitor Leadership Program, and we sent them all across the US to meet with people doing similar work. It was a great program. It's still a program that's been running now. It just celebrated its 80th anniversary last year, and it's been a pretty impactful program. But I tried some other things after that. I got into some administrative positions for a little bit. I actually worked on high school programs for about 3 years. I ran the Nestle Y program, which is, if you've not heard of that, I highly recommend that. It's a program that sends you around the world for either 6 weeks in the summer or 9 months for an academic year to learn a foreign language. I think there's 8 or 9 language choices, and the whole experience is paid for. It's a fantastic program. But then I moved to where I am now in the alumni office. But in between those, I had an opportunity to go work at a US embassy. Now, most of our staff at embassies are foreign service officers like Dan and Brianna. But every once in a while, there's an opportunity for a civil servant to go help out at an embassy. It could be for a couple months, or it could be for a few years. And I was fortunate enough to get this opportunity. I went to a small island in the South Pacific called East Timor. Not many people have heard of it. It was a fascinating place. And for 2 years, I got to work at the embassy, helping on English language programs. We did some environmental programs, which was really more on waste management. It was very much a developing country. And I like to tell people my favorite experiences in the government is when I convinced the ambassador to let me take a bunch of Timorese high school students snorkeling for the first time. So I like to tell everybody the government paid for me to go snorkeling on a tropical island. Um, but it was all part of this program of teaching these young high school students what was the resources in their community. They had these incredible coral reefs. And as this country was trying to develop, they were trying to develop tourism, but they really didn't know the resources they had. So we talked to them about waste management, and about why it was so important not to just let trash go down the rivers and into the ocean. And the end result of that was them seeing what was actually in the ocean, these coral reefs. A lot of them didn't swim, so this was the first time that they ever were able to do this. They ended up setting up their own NGO on waste management and recycling after we left, and they got a grant from the United Nations that was there, and they've now been going around the country helping them develop waste management policies and helping that country develop so they are able to continue their growth as an independent country. So you never know what can come up when you work at the State Department. We have all sorts of different experiences. And so I've loved my 16 years here. No job is perfect, but I've really enjoyed all of the opportunities I've had and the experiences, and looking forward to some of your questions later. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Brianna, and she's going to talk about her experience here at the department.
Thanks, Chris. Tonight, I just want to talk a little bit about why I joined the Foreign Service. You all want to hear our stories, right? And then what I do. Like Chris, I was an intern too. That was really the first time I got to know a bit about what it was like to be a diplomat abroad. But first, I joined the Foreign Service sort of on a whim. I took the first exam a month after September 11th. So I was in grad school in Washington, D.C., and I walked outside of my dorm and I saw people crying in the streets. And then you could see smoke from the Pentagon across the horizon. I had no idea what was going on. But all the exams as a result were canceled in the DC area, so I had to find someplace else to go to take my written exam. Flew out to Seattle, my alma mater for undergraduate, took it there, and fast forward about 6 months later, I got into the Foreign Service. I was given a slot. And I want to say that it was my dream and it was what I always aspired to, but honestly, I really applied because it was an opportunity to travel and to get paid. And I knew I wanted to travel. I knew I loved learning about different cultures. I was an anthropology major for a while. And then the other issue is that it was the first job offer I received after graduate school. So it was perfect timing in that sense. So I flew back out to DC, and then I joined the Foreign Service, met all of my colleagues in A100, and then was told, you're going to Mexico City to do consular work. Consular work is what a lot of us have to do. We put in our hard 2 years, we learn a lot. But you are stamping a lot of passports. But I learned a heck of a lot in Mexico City. But I am a political officer. We have different, I guess they're called cones, but we have different areas of expertise in the Foreign Service. Mine is politics. So as a political officer, I have traveled around the world. So what does a political officer do? Well, we read the news in a foreign country. We talk to other diplomats. We talk to government officials. We talk to civil society. We gather a lot of information. Sometimes it's gossip. Sometimes it's really good official information. And then we package it together and we write a report, much like you write reports in high school. And then we send it back to Washington, D.C. We're at the State Department and hope that it influences policy. As a result of the information we send back, we'll get taskings in return. Okay, now go and tell the government X, Y, and Z. If you're an ambassador, you're then sending the really important messages. If you're lower ranking, you're sending more the day-to-day cooperation messages. That's what a political officer does. It can be fun. Sometimes it can be just the same old, but you're doing it in a foreign country. Sometimes you have to do it in a foreign language. And sometimes, they don't want to meet with you. Sometimes they refuse to answer. So there are some interesting situations with that. But I want to give you two world examples. One was when I was in Moscow. So I was in Moscow for a couple years, and Russia, this is the first time Russia invaded. Sorry, my son is on his computer. Okay, so Russia invaded Crimea for the first time. My portfolio was refugees and internationally displaced people and a lot of sort of the softer security organizations in Moscow. No one knew what was going on, right? We had reports of Ukrainians, the Russians were claiming Ukrainians were flocking to Russia to join, to become Russian citizens. Meanwhile, we have, Russians who are, trying to get into Ukraine. People just going back and forth. Are they refugees? Are they just internal movements? Who knew? So I reached out to a lot of my contacts in Moscow, different NGOs and different IOs. If you've heard of ICRC, or IOM, UNHCR. These are all really big international groups that work with refugees and displaced people and provide support. So I gathered as much information as I could. I was looking on the internet to, doing geolocating, I kid you not, with maps and trying to get all this information and send it back. And it influenced how we provided aid to Ukraine. A lot of other people influenced it too, but that was my little part in how we developed U.S. foreign policy. Another example is when I was in New York. I'm fresh from the 3 years in New York on this, working on the Security Council. And there are a lot of terrorist attacks against some of the UN peacekeepers in West Africa. So whenever this would happen, I would have to work with the UN colleagues, call up the embassy, our embassy, gather information, who died, how many peacekeepers died, what countries were they from, how bad was the attack, all that information, and then send that back to Washington. Our ambassadors would write condolence notes to the affected countries. And then we would call a special meeting at the Security Council or write a special statement at the Security Council. So these are real world examples. But so my career has taken me all over, honestly. It's, I've sought jobs that I've wanted to do because of what they are, not jobs for promotion. So I seek jobs where I can have a good family life balance, but also jobs that I'm personally interested in. So here's the list of why and where. Uzbekistan, archaeology, Silk Road, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, throw them all in there. An amazing place to visit, and throw in former Soviet Union country, oil and gas. You have a really interesting place to work for a couple years. Sweden, I minored in Nordic studies in undergraduate. What a great opportunity to go to Stockholm. That's where I did my internship as well. But I got to learn about EU policy. I got to learn about Nordic policy, see it actually implemented instead of just reading it in my my courses in undergrad. Russia. Well, I told you about Russia. I was there at an interesting time. But to work in a country that has such a strong historical and current relevance, I could write home and talk to my friends and family, and they would know what I was talking about because it was in the headlines every day in the New York Times or Post. I worked on refugee issues in Jerusalem and in Abu Dhabi, working with Afghan refugees recently in Abu Dhabi. And then I worked on Palestinian refugees issues in Jerusalem. Really, fascinating, historical, but also you feel that you're giving back because you're doing something positive for people in real time. And then lastly, multilateralism at the Security Council in New York. I found that I love working on UN issues. The Palestinian refugee issue was a UN issue. I worked on peacekeeping in New York, and my next stop is going to be in Geneva, where I'm going to work on nuclear disarmament. So I can talk to you all you want about multilateral work. It's not very common in the Foreign Service. You usually do bilateral, country to country. But as I've progressed in my career, I've realized that I like the challenge of a bunch of countries having to get consensus or not. Often we don't agree. To try to find a way forward. It can be very frustrating, but it's relevant to the globe and not just one little country or one big country. Um, and with that, Chris, you want me to introduce Dan? The next up is Dan, and he's going to give you his perspectives on this.
All right, unmute. I can do that. Thank you, Brianna. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for being here. I just want to start out by saying that when I was your age, or when I was the age of maybe some of the attendees, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So to see in the Q&A already some fantastic questions is really encouraging. And we're always looking for signs of optimism and signs of, things can get better and can be better. And I think if you look at the motivation that many people have, certainly my motivation, I'm not going to speak to Chris and Brianna, but serving the nation, traveling, being out there, being the face of America and connecting with other cultures, that really is a huge motivator, I think, for many of us. Tiny bit on my story, my journey to the Foreign Service. I was always interested in the world around me as a kid. When I was really small, my family lived in Saudi Arabia for a little while. My dad was working for an airlines, or TWA, which is an old airline that's gone out of business, but they were working there, kind of helping the Saudis get their domestic airline up and running. And I was there before preschool, but I still remember some of the the time that I had there, and it stayed with me. Then flash forward, I went to college. When I started college, I was really interested in international things and politics and history and those kinds of things, which is pretty common story for folks that are in the Foreign Service. I'm in the Foreign Service like Brianna, or worked for the State Department like Chris as well. I started out studying Russian and wanted to be a Russian studies major, and it was right around the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. So it's a long time ago, if anybody knows their history. And I thought, well, wait, is this going to be of any value? Little did I know, if I just stuck with it, would have come back around about 25 years and been very valuable. But I was also then captivated. I took a class on Middle Eastern politics. Now, I had lived in the Middle East, and that resonated with me and stuck with me, and had some great professors. And then, so I started this course down sort of that part of the world, and started studying Arabic and Arabic history, Middle Eastern history. And that's the direction I went. I did undergrad. I went to grad school. I worked at a law firm to cure myself of wanting to be a lawyer. I went to grad school also in DC, and then I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do right after that. But I knew I needed a job, so I started substitute teaching. And about 2 days after I started, they came to me and said, "Can you take this job for the whole year?" Because another teacher had sort of left. And so I taught middle school history for 3 years here in Washington, D.C. And so, like Brianna, it's funny, we were both in D.C. on September 11th. And I walked out of the school that I'm in here in Alexandria, Virginia, and was, I think, Brianna, sort of a different part of the city, but we both saw and experienced the same thing. And it was powerful. It really changed the nation, as you guys probably know. Flash forward, I taught for a couple years, and then there was something missing. It was the international piece. So I'd gone to grad school to do international affairs, and I liked teaching middle school. I taught U.S. history, but there was a little piece missing. So I went to work for an NGO. So similar story with Chris. That NGO did international education, and I worked on the Fulbright program. And it was at that point, combined with my overseas experience, as a child, but I also did a study abroad program. So I highly recommend this when you get into college, or if in high school you have the opportunity to study overseas. I studied did a summer program in Syria, in Aleppo, Syria, a long time ago, obviously. And that stuck with me as well. So I worked for the NGO, and around that time, grad school, and in this work I was doing, I found out about the Foreign Service, and I took the exam a couple times. I was not as successful as Brianna at first, but I persevered, which is good, because a lot of people, it takes them a few times to pass, to go through all the stages of the Foreign Service exam. I did that, and I joined the Foreign Service and as a public diplomacy officer. So what I do overseas is really what Chris and I do here in Washington, D.C. I work with the foreign publics, either through media and press on one side of the house, or culture, language, English language, exchange programs, music, and that's really my passion because it is diplomacy that is engaged in building mutual understanding and explaining America to the foreign publics in a way so that they can understand what our motivations are, what our wishes are, and maybe they will influence their government. And Brianna does a lot of work with governments, either bilaterally, as she mentioned, government to government, or lots of governments together in that multilateral sphere. It's been a fascinating career in the Foreign Service, and this has already been discussed. We move around a lot, so you have to like that. You have to get used to it. It's difficult in many ways with families, even by yourself. You miss a lot. I think that there's a paradox to being a Foreign Service officer and doing our jobs. We're representing America. We do that, many of us, because we love our country and there's a patriotic part of it. But in order to serve, you have to be away from it. So you miss a lot of things about home, many things, simple things like having your favorite sports team on a time when you can watch it, not in the middle of the night. But then also more serious things like, if you have a death in the family, sometimes it's not easy to get back from wherever we're stationed, like East Timor. If Chris did that, I don't even know what kind of distance that was, or it was probably a 2-day trip home. So that comes into play as well. But I've been really lucky. I did most of my tours, my assignments in the Middle East. I was in Oman, in Egypt. Then I spent a year in Baghdad from 2014 to 2015. When I said I call it ISIS at the gates, it was a difficult time for sure. My family was obviously not with me. They were here in the US. And then I was the public affairs officer in Luxembourg, which is a small country, as you may know, in Western Europe, one of the wealthiest countries, if not the wealthiest in the world. And it's about the size of Rhode Island. And I was there for 3 years before coming back to work here in Washington, D.C., where I'm currently assigned. So I've had 2 assignments, well, 3, one 2-year, one was 1 year. And then I moved into my current assignment where I promote study abroad for U.S. Higher education. So that's why I was plugging that and dropping some links in the chat and things like that. But I think there's a ton of really good questions. Hopefully, I was going to start my timer. I talk fast. I'm sorry about that. But I'm ready for questions if the panel is, and really happy to be here with you all this evening.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Brianna. There are a ton of questions already. If you've got some, please put them into the Q&A feature, and we will work on going through all of them. And we'll just take our turn each ask or work on answering a question. There's several in there on internships. I'll go ahead and get us started on that one, and then Brianna can go next, and then Dan. On some of the other questions. But for internships, there's a lot of opportunities at the State Department, and the internship system is changing a little bit, and it changed pretty dramatically in the last year. So there's a variety of internships. Most of the opportunities are for undergrad or graduate students. Usually once you're at least a junior as an undergraduate. But there are opportunities for high school students as long as you're 16 years old. Dan put in a link in the chat earlier to careers.state.gov. It is a very good website. It's very clear information, lots of good information in there. So I strongly encourage you to spend some time exploring that. Not only does it have internships, but it has lots of information about career paths. But there are opportunities for high school students. The department recently started offering paid internships. This was a big change because most of our internships had been unpaid before. At the moment, the number of internships offered that are paid are still pretty small. There's 3 cycles every year. The internships are for about 10 weeks, and they're in person for the most part now. But there's another internship opportunity when you're in college called VSFS, Virtual Student Foreign Service. I think that's what it stands for. Like I said, a lot of acronyms. And this is a academic year-long internship for 10 hours a week, but it's fully virtual. Our office right now has about 7 interns that are in that virtual program, and it's fantastic. They're able to work it in with their school schedule, work on a variety of projects with us. We have one team doing all of our outreach for a program called the Academy for Women Entrepreneurs. And they are amazing. They have increased the outreach for that program so much. One of their articles that they wrote just reached 20 million viewers in Asia related to a big event that happened. So you get really involved in a variety of different aspects through these internships. And there's internships all over the federal government, not just the State Department. All the application deadlines adjust a little bit each year. So if you're on careers.state.gov, you won't see dedicated application deadlines, but they're usually 3 times a year for those in-person internships. And I think it's 1 time a year for just the virtual ones. But keep your eye on that. You can also follow the State Department on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, and they'll advertise those deadlines. But it's usually very far in advance, especially the in-person one, usually about 9 months in advance of the internship, because you do have to go through a security clearance process, especially for the in-person opportunity. The virtual one is a little bit faster for that. I think that covers most of the internship questions that were in there. I'll go through and double check in the Q&A. But Brianna, do you want to select the next question and go ahead and give an answer? I think there's quite a few in there now.
Sure. There's quite a few questions about sort of how you get assigned and where you can go and whatnot. You know, some people are really lucky and they get to go to every single spot they want to go to. Some people are not so lucky and they might go to like their number 10th choice. So there's just a lot of variables. As Dan was sort of mentioning, you know, you are, there's give and take in the service. And you have to enter knowing that you might go to a place where you have to take malaria medication, or you'll have to do a job that might not be too you know, exciting. Like if you don't like consular work, like me, I wasn't very good at consular work. Or you might go to a place that's very expensive. And as a new officer, you know, your salary is not too high, so you have to pinch pennies a little bit. There's just a lot of variables, but in my experience, given all the variables, I do feel that I've been able to go to places that I have wanted to go to. Maybe not my number one, but I've been able to. So you don't have to, you're not going to be told you have to go to this place. You're given some control. Every year when you bid, there is this long list, and you see what you qualify for, you see what you might have the best shot at getting, and that's what you go after. It's a strategy. Those who don't strategize and just say, I want to go to London and Paris, and they might be disappointed with the outcome. But I think in general, people are quite pleased. And once you get at post, you always find the pros and cons. Like you, Chris, East Timor, right? But there's fun stuff to do if you like water sports.
If I can jump in, I think I would agree 100%. The things that you have to know about the Foreign Service, when you join the Foreign Service, you have to commit to being worldwide available. So we can't just have somebody say, oh, I'm only going to go to Latin America, specifically these 5 countries. That's not possible, because we have to be able to move personnel around all of the time. So you have to be worldwide available. You have to commit to that. The other thing you have to do, and this is a challenge, and I'm going to put this out there because we are career the diplomats and civil servants. You have to be able to publicly promote and support the foreign policy of the United States. This is not always popular in certain parts of the world. As administrations change, foreign policy changes. And so we have to make sure that we are able to do our jobs and publicly promote the foreign policy or support the foreign policy of the United States. That doesn't mean that we can't have private opinions, but we have to keep those. There's a time and place to sort of say, oh, I really disagree with this. And that's hard for some people. We have seen people over the years when an administration changes, you'll have people leave the Foreign Service because they say, you know what, I can't in good faith support this policy. So it's another thing to consider. Some really good questions on, freedom to choose assignments. I think Brianna talked about that. The first two assignments, generally you're kind of directed when you're a new officer, at least in the Foreign Service. And then after that, it opens up, and Brianna kind of talked about that, where you're looking for and saying, I think I would be good at this job here. And you kind of lobby for it. It's based on what's available at the time and what skills you have. The other thing, I saw a couple questions in here. One of them was, how do you deal with the stress of moving around? And I think that's a really good question. Some people deal with it better than others. It is stressful to have to move to a new place every 2 years. Our assignments are generally 2 or 3 years long. An assignment like Baghdad, it was 1 year. So I was only there for a year. Those are what we would call hardship assignments. And there's lots of things that you have to think about, particularly if you move with a family or if you move with pets or those kinds of things. The great thing about the Foreign Service is that you do get to take your family with you many places. The challenging thing is you get to take your family with you all of those places, and you have to experience the stress that they feel, and you have to take care of them, and you do all of those things while you're also trying to learn a new job in a new culture, in a new country. So that I would say that is a great question. It's something you have to think about, because your mental health, and we live in a society today where the stigmas around taking care of your mental health are dropping. And I think that's really important because even in a place like Luxembourg, which is a beautiful country, every time I walked into a shop, it was likely that I was going to need to use French, and my French is only okay. And so when you're trying to pick up your dry cleaning and the person across from you only speaks French, I know it sounds like a terrible, really, it's not stressful. It can get stressful because it's just a normal thing. Now you add like driving in Cairo, or, the security situation in Baghdad, or any of the other things that we've all experienced, trying to figure out what's going on with the country where you're in is invading another country, like Brianna had to do. So it's a great question. It's something that we have to take seriously, and it is something that challenges all of us, I think, in different ways. I'll stop there because there's some other questions coming in as well.
Thanks, Dan. Just to add a little bit more to that, there are some assignments that come with built-in breaks. They're called R&Rs, or rest and recuperation, and it varies from place to place. But it's basically where the State Department tells you need to leave the country for a little bit of time and take a break. And you get more of those breaks built in depending on how difficult the living situation may be compared to what you're used to in the US. When I was in East Timor, we got one of those each year. But one of the ways that colleagues said was really good to adjust, even though we were on a beautiful tropical island, people were really friendly. They said you needed to get off the island about maybe every 3 or 4 months just to get access to a variety of other things. There was limited internet, there was limited fresh food in Timor. There wasn't much to do other than hang out at the beach. Now, I like the beach a lot, so I was pretty happy with that, but there were also crocodiles swimming on the shore. So you always had to keep your eye out on the beach there. So you always had to find a way to give yourself a break, to find your support network. And yes, when you're 12 hours or 14 hours different from all your friends and family in the US, that can be a little harder. But your colleagues are usually a good source of support as well. I'm going to move on to another question, I think. Here, let's see. We've got a couple more on, there was one on internships. Oh yeah, this is the one about universities. There's a question on which universities may have strong political studies. I'm going to adjust this one just a little bit because this is usually a question that comes up a lot, is either what should I study or where should I go to school if I want to go work in the Foreign Service or work at the State Department? And the answer that is usually the best one we give to everybody and has led people to be the most successful they can be is go to the school where you can succeed, where you find things that you can study that you really are interested in. The State Department, in a very short phrase, covers every topic you can possibly think of. We have experts on every issue. We have generalists that have to be able to adapt and adjust what they're an expert on very quickly. And so the State Department is looking for people with good critical thinking skills, good communication skills, people that have knowledge of world events and world affairs, but also you need to know a lot about the United States as well. And so go to a school, study what you want, where you have the most interest and what you think is going to help you succeed and do well in school. The actual degree you get, I think, has very little impact on what career track you sometimes can take at the federal government, especially at the State Department, because we're looking for people with all sorts of different backgrounds and experiences. We need to represent all of the United States. We need to be able to talk about everything as a department and answer everything that comes up, whether that's beef imports from South Korea, whether that's technology issues in Europe, whether that is healthcare in some other part of the world, transportation issues. We have an Office of Transportation Policy that works on airline regulations and all the flights routes that are allowed between the United States and other countries, which airlines can take those. I mean, there's lawyers, there's doctors, there's mental health professionals, because we have, when we send people around the world, there's a support network. And so study the things that are of interest to you, the things that you want to focus on, and then the rest will usually pretty much work out, because like I said, the State Department is looking for people that do everything. We also have people that are experts in law enforcement as well. So there's a big range. And I guess I add a little bit to that. There's two types of Foreign Service officers as well. And I don't think we got into that yet. There's the Foreign Service generalist, and Dan and Brianna talked about this a little bit, where there's 5 different focus areas, but there's also Foreign Service specialists. And these are the medical professionals, the law enforcement professionals, and a couple others. And that's a different hiring process than the Foreign Service generalists. But the point is, study the things that are of interest to you. I went to California State University at Long Beach. I enjoyed the school. It's a very large 30,000 person school. It is definitely not any school that you're going to see at the top of US News and World Report's list. I loved it because it was also very cheap, so I didn't have student loans. And it served me really well. It gave me a lot of interaction with people that had different viewpoints than I did. We had fantastic discussions in all my politics and constitutional law classes. And I excelled, I would argue, at the department, and nobody really asked me where I went to college. So, but it was a school that worked for me. So anyways, that's I think covers most of that one.
Just to add in, the schools in DC are known for having strong international relations policy programs. And I focus on policy because you also can do more of a theoretical study program in other colleges. The schools in DC don't quite focus on that. Plus, there's a lot of schools here, and there are a lot of internship opportunities here. I happen to go to GWU, or George Washington University, I have 2 master's degrees. This is my first master's degree, second master's degree. And I was an IR major. And my previous master's was more theoretical. But what's more practical? Well, let's see, in 17 years, my first 17 years, I really never used the theory. So the policy was important. But then when I went to the Security Council, that's where I started to use the theory, because there's game theory and chicken, all those little theories. And poli-sci does it a little bit as well. But international relations writ large includes, sociology, anthropology, economics. You're getting to know, you're sort of well-rounded. So, but as Chris was saying, go for what you want, because I'm sure in the Foreign Service, you can be, you can go to culinary school, or you can be a professional mechanic, and you still can have a very good career in the Foreign Service. It matters what you want to do with yourself, not so much what your degree says.
Okay, there's two that I was going to answer. One of them is if you're a dual citizen, US and EU, can they work for the State Department? The answer is yes, but it depends on what you're going to do for the State Department. So in some cases, you can work at an embassy overseas as a local staff member or someone who's living there. I had a friend who's a Foreign Service officer now who started out as one of our local staff in Madrid. His mom was from the U.S., his dad was Spanish, and so he had the dual citizenship. But to be a Foreign Service officer, and Brianna, I think you could correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to have to give up the passport of one of the countries. Don't quote me on that. You can get hired, but it's something that you would want to look into. It's not a negative. It's just there you have to go through a process. Certain countries won't let you have dual citizenship. Obviously, certain EU countries, I think in Germany, it's harder to be a dual citizen or whatever. So I would say to the person that asked that, investigate. But it's a good question, and it's actually very unique. The other question is from Alexander, and I wanted to answer this one. And the classic State Department answer is it depends, right? So the question is, how much freedom do you have when you're traveling, in a country where you're stationed? And it depends on a lot of things. It depends on where you are and when you're there. So I was in Egypt from 2012 to 2014. 2012 was after the Arab Spring, after the revolution in Egypt. Things were not as good. And there were big chunks of Egypt that we couldn't travel to when we arrived. Specifically, we couldn't travel overland through the Sinai because there were a lot of kidnappings and it was just dangerous. As if you look back at history, it's over a decade now. As 2012 went on, things got even worse. And so by 2013, there was what we called a military-backed change of government. The army stepped in and got rid of the president at the time, and things were really dicey. And so in Egypt, we had some freedom to travel, but it was very specific places at times. In other places in the world, you have a lot more freedom, no restrictions at all. When I lived in Oman, we went everywhere. Oman's very peaceful. We went all over the place. And so it depends. Even in certain cities in the world, there's certain neighborhoods in certain cities that are regional security officers. So Chris mentioned diplomatic security. This is a Foreign Service position. They're Foreign Service generalists, people that have a background generally in law enforcement or from the military or other things. These are federal agents that form part of the State Department, our diplomatic security service. So every embassy and every consulate has a regional security officer, and that person is in charge of protecting the embassy or the facility, the classified information that we have there, and the people that are part of the mission. And so often your RSO, your regional security officer, will say, you cannot go here, don't go here. In some cases, they'll say, don't go to this restaurant. They can be very specific in giving us that advice. And guess what? If you're smart, you listen to them because that's their job. So I wanted to kind of offer that it was a great question. It's great to be in places where you can travel all over the place, snorkel, let's say, in the ocean. But there are times when we can't do that. And in Cairo, I went to work every day in an armored shuttle. Now, in our neighborhood, the neighborhood we lived in, we had our little Volkswagen station wagon. We drove around the neighborhood, and my wife drove it to and from school and things like that. But going to the embassy in the heart of Cairo, we were required to be in that vehicle, generally speaking. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Thanks, Dan. I'm gonna move to a question from Marlena, talking about some of the challenges working at the State Department or government. I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I just want to expand. Dan, I think, had mentioned that sometimes the policies change of the federal government. We are here to help implement the policies of the government and share those policies with the rest of the world. So after an election, you could have spent the previous 2 years working on a certain issue, pushing a certain policy, talking to a foreign government about it, and then overnight have to go to those same people and argue the exact opposite of what you've just spent 2 years doing. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times policies stay pretty consistent from administration to administration, but that is something to be aware of, is that you're not, necessarily sharing your personal beliefs, but you're representing the US government. So whatever the policy of the US government is, you may personally really disagree with something, but that's the job, that you have to be pushing that thing. Internally, you can raise those issues, you can make arguments about why we should reconsider a policy, but when you're speaking out to the public or speaking to a foreign government, or then it's time to implement it, you need to be implementing that policy. And that can be something that causes a lot of people stress as well within the job. Some people are able to adjust and adapt and sort of separate those two things. Some people, it's too much and they decide to leave the government and they just say, I don't feel comfortable doing that. That's a choice everybody has to make. We have a lot of political appointees within the federal government. There's over 4,000 political appointee positions. So those positions usually are at more senior levels, a lot of ambassadors, about half of them, I think, the Secretary of State at the State Department, and several other positions. So those people will change, the people in those positions change frequently. Some of them will have expertise and experience in the field that they're in charge of. Some will have less experience, let me put it that way. And so you've got to spend more time educating somebody that's just come in and basically become in charge, that may not have the same knowledge and background that everybody else working on the team. And that it is the federal government. There are a lot of rules and regulations. They're all there for a reason. But when you are new to the government, it can definitely be overwhelming trying to learn these, try to figure out the most efficient ways to be coordinating across the government. We mentioned earlier, there are 80,000 State Department employees alone. My bureau, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, has about 650 employees. That's a lot of people to coordinate with. And so there are some challenges there. I don't think that's necessarily unique to the State Department or the federal government, these challenges of communicating across an organization or changes in leadership. I've seen that other places as well, but it's definitely something to be aware of. But in terms of what makes it really fulfilling, I talked a little bit about my experience in East Timor, seeing people's eyes sort of light up and finding a connection and finding a path forward, being able to help give somebody the resources or tools to make their community better, to build a better relationship with the United States. Those are pretty amazing experiences. Still on my desk, I have the photo of when I left Timor of all those high school students that we had took on this program. I look at that almost every day. One of the first exchange programs I ever worked on was an urban planner from South America. And I was 21 years old. This is my first job out of college. I was, still new to everything. And at the orientation, at the beginning of his program, he was in tears. And I did not understand this. I was like, what, did we do something wrong? What's going on? he was so excited for this opportunity of this exchange program. He was telling us it was going to change his life, his family's life, the lives of the community, because he was going to find connections in the US, learn from our experiences, and be able to adapt some of those to his community and be able to adjust that, and put everybody on a better path. I was just sort of knocked over by that experience. This was, June 2021 or 2020, or 2001, excuse me. The time's going by. It stuck with me for 22 years now. How important these little exchanges sometimes can be. It was a 3-week experience. And so that seeing something like that, or somebody going on a high school exchange and coming back years later and saying, this totally changed my life path, I now got this opportunity or this job, that to me makes it really rewarding and fulfilling. And that's why I really like working in the alumni office now, because we get to hear more of those stories at the end of some of these exchange programs. So yeah, there's definitely always a balance, good days and bad days in the job, but definitely more good days than bad days, I would say.
If you don't mind, Chris, there is a question about interns and also about cones. Quickly, if you choose a cone and don't like it, can you switch? In short, yes, but it can take a while. But it is possible, and people have done it, and they're making it easier to do. Internships. For all of you out there who are thinking that a foreign service career might be good for you, try an internship. They're paid now, which is a huge change within the past year. You don't have to worry about a lot of things now when you go abroad. You can choose a country that you are interested in, not a country that you can afford to live in. So go for an internship. You can do it in political, economic, public affairs. It's the best way to test the waters and to see if this excites you or if it doesn't. And then you know that you should go do something else maybe. But also, it's pretty cool to say that you got to work at an embassy or you got to work at the State Department. Regardless of whether or not you continue in the Foreign Service, it is going to look good on your resume. So go for it. And don't worry about getting in. Just go for it. You can put multiple choices down on where you want to go, and really it's the best way to do it. So what's the likelihood progression from an intern to a stable career path? I wouldn't say that most people in the Foreign Service have interned. I think, Chris and I, Dan, you didn't intern, right? No. So 2/3, that's probably higher than normal. But that doesn't mean that you have to be an intern to have a good career either. It just gives you the understanding that this is what you want. It gave me a little more of a oomph, like, yes, I'm going down the right path. This is why I'm going to take the exam. And there wasn't the uncertainty.
I think we need to wrap up. I could give really quick 30-second remarks. There's never enough time to talk about this work. I will say what I always say: the State Department doesn't have aircraft carriers. We don't have tanks. We have people. So the people that we can recruit, the people that we can inspire, the people that we can help to see this as a career path forward become the strength of the State Department in the generations that follow us. So I am always recruiting people and asking people, think about this. Is this a path that you want? The second thing I would say is it's not linear. It's not a straight line. You may go in lots of different directions. Every bit of experience that you get when you get that experience, it's important. So you can have another career before it. You can study just about anything that you want. Chris mentioned that. And so don't think that there's one right way to do anything. It's your way. So make sure that you understand that and don't put too much pressure on yourselves to go to this right school or take this right job. I think Chris said it really well. Find a place where you can thrive. Find a place where you can do well and learn and sort of discover and find your passion. So those would be the things that I would want to leave with you all that were here with us tonight. Use every resource that you can. find information in this day and age. There's lots of information out there, but also know that sometimes things take time. Sometimes they happen quickly. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So if you're interested, hopefully you've learned some things tonight. Keep going. So I'll stop there. I really enjoyed being able to talk to everybody. Wish we could have seen the whole room full of people, but I also like the fact that somebody could be sitting in a very small town. I grew up in rural Virginia. And you know, if there's somebody in a rural part of the country right now, in the past, you may not have had this opportunity. So we're really so glad to be with you and to be part of it. So I'll stop there and leave it to Brianna and to Chris.
Thanks for watching. I hope we were able to answer a lot of your questions and pique your interest in joining the Foreign Service.
Thank you for spending the last hour with us. The careers at the State Department, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of possibilities. Thank you for the last hour, and good luck on whatever path you decide is right for you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.